some measure of good news today. The UN Security Council, and really it was the so-called E10, that is the elected members, is that what it is? Non-permanent Security Council members. The 10 were Algeria, Guyana, Japan, Malta, Mozambique, Republic of Korea, Sierra Leone, Slovenia, and Switzerland. This resolution was also backed by the UK and France, I believe, as well, in addition, obviously, to China and Russia. And it basically, the U.S. Was just simply not in a position to veto this one. Yeah. And so they abstained. But the key paragraph here, just go scroll down. The UN Security Council, and I'm quoting now, demands an immediate ceasefire for the month of Ramadan, respected by all parties, leading to a lasting, sustainable ceasefire. Now, the U.S. is responsible for that word sustainable as opposed to permanent.
And lasting was, I think, the change. Yeah. The lasting sustainable, right? It was supposed to be permanent.
Oh, permanent sustainable ceasefire. And they changed it to lasting sustainable.
Exactly.
Nevertheless, I mean, this, it just shows you sort of like the importance of each word in these documents. Nevertheless, leading to a lasting, sustainable ceasefire, and also demands the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages, as well as ensuring humanitarian access to address their medical and humanitarian needs. Now, this is an important construction because the U.S. wanted the demand for the immediate and unconditional release of hostages conditioned as a condition for a lasting, sustainable ceasefire, which of course has been supposedly the Israeli position. But the UN Security Council did not do that. They simply put these two demands into the same sentence, but they are not conditioned upon each other. So there is no sort of like, well, they haven't released hostages, so we don't have to have a ceasefire. And there's no ceasefire, so we don't have to release hostages. These are two separate demands that are not conditioned upon each other. What's the legal force of this? I mean, there is no there is legal force in the sense that international law has legal force. The problem is there's no international cop to come down. However, this is going to be used as the predicate for what we're about to see, I would predict in the next 2 or 3 weeks, an increasing embargo of Israel.
Yeah.
Now, the U.S. is not legally bound to not provide weapons, but this is going to create more pressure domestically from lawmakers. Because look, the U.S. did not veto this. They abstained. They were forced. I mean, this is the way that international politics works. Just to finish this, as well as ensuring humanitarian access to address their medical and other humanitarian needs, and further demands that the parties comply with their obligations under international law in relation to all persons they detain. So, and then they go on to emphasize the urgent need to expand the flow of humanitarian assistance and reinforce the protection of civilians in the Gaza Strip, reiterates its demand for the lifting of all barriers to the provision of humanitarian assistance at scale in line with so there's another demand there, and that demand is exclusively focused at Israel, which has been creating barriers
for food
through the
to get-
provision of humanitarian services. And so,
which is, I think, by the way, enough. I read this legal opinion, basically, that was written in the European Journal of International Law, where they posture that intent for genocide could be determined based on the withholding of aid, of food coming into the Gaza Strip alone, which, I mean, I think we are well past that. But from a legal perspective, and from what we saw with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on the House floor, calling it a genocide, using her sizable influence within, the progressive members of the Democratic Party, and there are a lot of Democrats that really like her and listen to her, saying specifically that the famine that's created by Israel is sufficient to determine intent of genocide, basically going ahead of like what the ICJ will eventually determine, was notable. It's the famine and what they're hearing from Chris Van Hollen and these other Democrats who are going to the crossings and seeing Israel is turning away trucks. They're slowing the delivery of aid, of food, and turning trucks away because there's like children's scissors in them and things like that.
Look,
like, no, but the point is they have firsthand knowledge from other Democrats, which is changing things.
The U.S. has also like tacitly admitted it.
I know.
If you need to airdrop and you need to build a port when there are roads that lead into the country, it begs the question, what's going on with those roads?
But from AOC's perspective, right, from a U.S. domestic politics perspective, making that case that a deliberate famine of a population where you control the borders to wherever they are, basically an open air prison, concentration camp, whatever you want to call it, that is sufficient to determine genocidal intent. That's something that is beginning, I think, to set in way too late, way too many lives lost. We told you this was a genocide in November, okay? But that's from a domestic politics perspective, I think, what is making the pressure ramp up. How obvious it is that they're starving these people to death.
Another thing is, like, it's nice to move forward on the ceasefire stuff. Labor for Palestine calling on all U.S. unions who, of course, the calls for a ceasefire from unions have been great, but the relationship of weapons needs to end. It needs to absolutely end, and that's the call that Labor for Palestine is saying now. So.
All right, we will later in the program play a clip of AOC on the House floor. That is, I think, along with what we heard from Van Hollen earlier in the week, we're beginning, and frankly, what we saw from Schumer as a litmus test more than anything else as to what was going on in the Senate. Chuck Schumer, I assure you, is not taking the lead on this. Chuck Schumer is, I think, consistent with, my longtime assessment of him as a concierge. When he gets up there and says there's a problem with Bibi Netanyahu, he is, trying to placate a real, I think, movement within the Democratic caucus in the Senate that he is attempting to get out in front of, both to service them and to get out in front of them by letting a little air out of the tires. So there's a lot of things that are happening in the U.S. Congress. It remains to be seen if they're going to be able to stop. There was $3.8 billion, in my understanding, in the budget that was just passed the other day to go to Israel in terms of aid.
Yep.
But to stop the next tranche of 11 billion at the very least would send a strong message to Israel, which may or may not implicate their domestic politics and sort of like force an end to this assault, but we shall see. Big news, folks. Most of you are probably aware of this already, I would imagine. But in response to the U.S. abstaining at the UN, Bibi Netanyahu has officially canceled a delegation that was coming to the U.S.
I'll have to cancel my dinner reservation.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness.
The delegation isn't coming?
Not the delegation.
Folks,
Genocide Air delegation is going to save some gas money.
What if Israel's delegation never comes again to the United States? What will we do?
folks, all we can tell you at this time is just stay in your homes and wait until further information. That's the only thing that we can advise you at this time.
Do you know what's really funny is Israel trying to exert international, I saw Ed Germentum kind of make this point a little bit earlier, but international pressure on the United States, the world superpower, by saying oh, buddy, how are you guys going to fare without us coming and showing diplomatic relations through our delegation?
What's fascinating is that I think the Netanyahu government must be somewhat deluded as to the political implications of them doing this. Mm-hmm. Because I suspect, this is complete conjecture on my part, that they just cannot believe how Biden's reacted to this.
Yep.
And that it must be a concern of Biden's politically that he will lose the Israel supporters' votes if he doesn't act in this way, which is completely unfounded by the data, incidentally. But I am sure they're like, what? I can't believe it. He's like, don't do this. Here's some weapons. And I think Netanyahu must think that this is going to put Biden in hot water. I will tell you this. That is all resolved. There is not a single person, I think, who is going to look at this and all of a sudden change their perspective on whether they're going to vote for Biden,
right,
based upon Netanyahu's delegation not coming. I'll remind you, Netanyahu openly campaigned against Obama, and it did not implicate his Jewish vote or probably the Christian Zionist vote either. They're not going to vote for him, and they didn't.
Right.
And the Jewish vote is going to still overwhelmingly vote for Biden, regardless of. I think they would have. I don't think it would have made a difference if he come out for ceasefire in day one. He wouldn't have lost any votes over that.
Yeah. Right.
This is not. Joe Biden is not operating with elections in mind, to the extent that he should, never mind the morality of this or any of those questions.
And I mean, this is just who Netanyahu is. I just want to be clear here. This was in Haaretz when basically Netanyahu has always been an incredibly arrogant politician. James Baker, this is a paragraph here, temporarily banned him from the State Department. Madeleine Albright described him as an Israeli Newt Gingrich, and it wasn't a compliment. Bill Clinton emerged from his first meeting with Benjamin Netanyahu in 1996, then serving his first term as prime minister, more than a little annoyed by his brash self-confidence. "Who's the effing superpower here?" Clinton exclaimed to his aides. That's kind of a famous quote. But Netanyahu has always been extremely arrogant, is unyielding in his belief that he has the ability to play American politicians like a fiddle, and that he has unwavering belief that he can influence U.S. public opinion. I mean, that's what he was saying when there was beginning to be pushback at the start after October 7th. So this is the hubris that I think usually comes before the fall. Now, unfortunately, there's going to be, I think, tens of thousands more Palestinians who die. I mean, just because of starvation, even if the bombing and the killing were to stop.
Pappy thinks that Israeli Society, saw him a couple weeks ago on an interview, thinks that Israeli Society has a bunch of headwinds with regards to material reality, that these sorts of pressures, it's
I saw that on the Electric Intifada, right? Was that the one?
No, but it probably.
He said something similar. He's not sure when, but he thinks that there's a major change coming there. I had a conversation with a guy who served in the IDF. And he it was more reasonable than I would have anticipated, but also I think there's a sort of a something structural happening there in terms of but he believes that the Israeli population is one big loss for the IDF away from turning on this whole thing. He thinks that the military is not interested. I mean, we'll see. I wonder. I think really the way that this ends is the U.S. saying we're done, and I don't know when that happens.